Have you ever wondered why a man grows quieter the more awakened you become? Not colder, just restrained, as if there's something unspoken behind his eyes. Something ancient, something echoing from a place even he doesn't fully understand. He may smile, he may adore, he may even claim to love. But in the presence of a woman who sees beyond the veil, who walks through her own inner fire, who embodies softness and sovereignty in one breath, he begins to tremble inside, not out of fear, but recognition. You see, most men don't walk with their wounds in the open. They carry them in bone and blood, masked beneath ambition, pride, charm, and distraction. But the spiritually awakened woman, she is not fooled by surface. Her presence becomes a mirror, and not just any mirror, the kind that reflects his unspoken longings, the kind that reveals his hunger for something deeper than pleasure or praise, the kind that whispers back truths he was never ready to admit. And so begins the unraveling, the trembling ache of sacred exposure. For within every man, no matter how guarded or driven, there lives a labyrinth of secret desires, ones so primal, so tender that even he hides them from himself. Yet in the gaze of the awakened woman, these desires begin to pulse again. Not because she gives them to him, but because her mere being reminds him they were there all along. The first secret. He longs to be seen by the divine, and he doesn't know how to ask. Not seen in the way the world teaches, not admired for success or praised for protection, but to be seen soul deep. To have the mask of masculinity pulled away, gently, fearlessly, by a woman who doesn't need him to perform, only to exist. The awakened woman, in all her intuitive silence, stirs this ache. She watches him without flinching. She doesn't chase his approval. She understands his shadow. And in that understanding, something ancient in him begins to thaw. But this desire terrifies him. Because to be seen is to be vulnerable. And to be vulnerable is to lose the myth of control. So he resists. He pulls away. Not because he doesn't want her, but because he's never had a map for this kind of intimacy. In the light of her consciousness, he must unlearn everything that once made him feel powerful. And here comes the second secret. He wants to collapse in her softness without being shamed. For generations, men have been taught that surrender is weakness, that to lean, to unravel, to cry is unmanly. But how wrong that teaching was. Deep in his subconscious, a man yearns for a safe place to lay down his sword. Not forever. Just long enough to rest. Just long enough to fall apart. And the awakened woman. She becomes that place. Not because she mothers him, but because she is grounded. She is still. She has held her own darkness in her hands and kissed it. She does not flinch at his rage, his guilt, his grief. And so he tests her. Not always consciously, but through distance, silence, even sabotage. Will she still hold presence when he forgets who he is? Will she stand firm in herself, or demand his performance to soothe her own fears? If she passes this test, he begins to open. Slowly, awkwardly, but truly. The third secret? K. He wants to serve her soul before body. In a world that teaches conquest over connection, many men have forgotten that they were once wired for devotion. Not servitude, not submission, but sacred offering. To build, to protect, to elevate not from ego, but reverence. The awakened woman calls this out of him, not through manipulation, but embodiment. She doesn't demand submission. She inspires alignment, and yet this call shakes him. Because to serve from soul requires a death of the performative masculine. No more trophies, no more pretending, only truth. And truth is terrifying when you've built your worth on illusion. Still, part of him, the deepest part, knows this is what he was born for. To offer himself without losing himself, to be strong without domination. To hold her heart without trying to own it. Then there is the fourth secret, the one most guarded of all. He craves her mystery, but fears being consumed by it. The spiritually awakened woman does not live only on the surface. Her mind is a maze, her soul a temple, her energy untamable. She is a paradox, gentle and wild, nurturing and fierce. And though part of him is drawn to this, another part hesitates, because what he cannot label, he cannot control. And what he cannot control, he cannot predict. But this very mystery is what keeps her unforgettable. The moment he thinks he's figured her out, she reveals a new layer. Not to manipulate, but because she is ever unfolding. And in that unfolding, he is invited to grow. Not faster, but deeper. Not outward, but inward. And that kind of journey, most men were never shown how to walk it. Still, the hunger remains. He watches her from afar, sometimes in silence, sometimes in dreams, because something in him knows her soul is not just a destination, it is a mirror of what he has yet to reclaim. These desires, they are not about lust, not even about love in the way songs and stories sell it. These are archetypal yearnings, born from the tension between anima and animus, between ego and essence. The spiritually awakened woman does not just walk into a man's life. She disturbs the equilibrium of everything false. She lights a fire in places long buried. And not every man can withstand that burn, but those who do, they awaken too. And that is where we pause, for now. Asterisk, they say, men are simple. But only those who never dared to look into the wilderness behind their eyes would believe that lie. Because beneath the surface of the grounded provider, the aloof, intellectual, or even the emotionally detached wanderer, there coils a yearning that defies logic's sacred longing that no words could fully articulate. And when a man stands before a spiritually awakened woman, something ancient within him either trembles or rises. She is not like the others. She is the mirror he didn't ask for. She shines not with the shimmer of external perfection, but with the unmistakable light of self-possession. Her calm is not performance, it is earned. Her words carry depth, not charm. Her presence evokes rather than appetite. And that is precisely why he hides. Because the man who has not yet wrestled his own shadows cannot survive in the light. She brings there is a secret hunger for approval buried deep in the masculine psyche, one often mistaken for ego. But in truth, it is the little boy in him who still needs to know, am I enough? When he stands before the awakened woman, he doesn't see just her, he sees the test. Will she see past his armor? Will she accept the parts he was taught to reject? He won't say it aloud, but he desperately hopes she will look at his broken edges and not turn away. Yet he hides that desire under jokes, distractions, or coldness. Because vulnerability has always been a dangerous currency in the masculine world, he wants her to surrender, but not in body. In truth, what he secretly longs for is emotional surrender, a kind of raw, trusting openness that tells him she is not just analyzing him, but feeling him. The awakened woman is often mistaken for being too much or too deep, when in reality, her depth only intimidates the parts of him that haven't learned to swim. He wants to dive in, but he fears drowning. So instead, he pretends he's fine in the shallow end. Another secret. He wants to lead, but only if she will trust him too. Not because he wants control, but because, biologically and spiritually, masculinity feels fulfilled when it can provide safety. But the awakened woman doesn't give her trust easily. She has seen too many false kings build empires on empty promises. She waits, she watches, and he feels her watching, and that gaze pierces deeper than any word. He desires to be the man who can hold her storms without flinching, the one she chooses to lean on, not because she is weak, but because she feels safe. And yet, paradoxically, another hidden desire is to be led by her spirit, Not controlled, but guided. Men don't admit this easily. They've been conditioned to be the compass, not the wind. But when a spiritually awakened woman moves through life with grace, self-awareness, and emotional maturity, there is something profoundly attractive about her inner compass. He yearns to follow not her instructions, but her essence. He wants to understand her rituals, her silence, her wisdom, her strange, beautiful boundaries. But he won't say it. He'll just observe, silently, pretending to be unaffected while something ancient in his soul kneels in quiet admiration. Men also hide their fear of not being enough for such a woman. The fear that she will outgrow him, that she will one day wake up, look at him with those eyes that see too much and realize she doesn't need him at all. This fear eats at the masculine heart more than it will ever admit. And so he withdraws, sabotages, or pretends indifference, not because he doesn't feel, but because he feels too much. He masks insecurity with nonchalance. He hides longing behind logic. He runs from her depths and then curses the world for its shallowness. Then there is his desire to be forgiven, not for something specific, but for the ways he's failed to be who he knows he could be. The awakened woman sees through the posturing and the false power plays. She doesn't get seduced by titles or charm. She senses integrity or its absence. And in her presence, he feels the weight of his own misalignment. He wants her forgiveness not as a transaction, but as a recognition that he too is on a journey, that he too is evolving, that even in his mess, he is still worthy of being seen. Lastly, the most secret of all, he wants to be chosen, not for what he gives or what he does, but for who he is, naked and unperformed. The spiritually awakened woman is rarely impressed by material success or social validation. She values presence, honesty, and inner work. And so he tries to become something for her more stable, more grounded, more emotionally aware. Not because she asked him to, but because something in her awakens his highest self. He might never admit this out loud. But in the quiet moments, when he's alone with his own thoughts, he whispers the hope that she sees him, that she sees through him, and still stays. These are not desires, he confesses. These are the ones he tucks away beneath layers of distraction, bravado, and performance. But when he meets a spiritually awakened woman, she doesn't just touch his skin, she touches his soul. And the soul, once touched, never forgets. Asterisk, they say. The awakened woman sees with eyes that pierce illusion. She feels what others suppress. She walks not on the surface of things, but on the undercurrents, barefoot across the soul's terrain. And that's precisely what makes her both irresistible and terrifying. For she is not impressed by masks, not swayed by performance, not moved by shallow charm. She listens beyond words. She smells truth on a man's breath. And when he knows she sees him fully and without mercy, it awakens something in him that he doesn't want the world to see, something he may not even want to see himself. There's a desire many men carry buried so deep it shows only in the cracks of their pride. It is the longing to be completely unguarded, naked, not in body, but in spirit, with a woman who will not use it against them. This is the sacred ache, to be vulnerable in a world that tells him to be made of steel. 8. And so, when a spiritually awakened woman enters his orbit, when her presence invites him to exhale the armor, his soul lights up in silent panic and secret hunger. You see it in how he stares too long and then looks away, how he tries to impress and then pulls back. He wants her not just sexually, though that current runs strong, but something more primal, more dangerous. He wants her to witness him without judgment, to touch the part of him that even he has locked away. But to surrender to such a woman is no small thing. Her frequency is too high for lies. Her body will not open to force. Her heart will not soften for manipulation, and he knows this. That's why another secret desire blooms within him, the wish to be initiated by her. Not by seduction or flattery, but by transformation. He craves the kind of challenge that forces him to meet himself. Not the version shaped by society or ego, but the wild, unruly masculine that exists before the world tamed him. The awakened woman, she calls that out of him. She doesn't need him to be powerful in the world's eyes. She needs him to be real. That frightens him, that frees him, that awakens his warrior or triggers his shadow. And so he hides this longing behind career goals, casual texts, cocky smiles. But if you look closely, you'll see it in how he lingers when she speaks. About pain with power. How he watches her hands when she moves with grace. He is studying something he doesn't yet understand. What it looks like when a woman belongs entirely to herself. That's another secret hunger, admiration for her sovereignty. Her refusal to dim, her self-trust, the way she doesn't chase, not love, not attention, not approval. The way she commands space without even trying. He is drawn to it like a man dying of thirst kneels to drink from a sacred spring. Yet he doesn't know how to approach her. She doesn't respond to the usual formulas, and so he stalls in. The space between desire and unworthiness. Here lies another hidden truth, the fear of being seen as small in her eyes. Not small in stature, but in soul. He worries he is not yet the man who could hold space for her spirit. That his trauma might become an anchor around her flight. That his silence might deafen her melody. And yet, he hopes she see the man inside the fear. That maybe, just maybe, she won't require perfection, but presence, and what he wants. More than her admiration, more than her beauty, more than even her surrender, is her trust. Because he knows if he earns that, it means he has become something worthy. That her trust is not given lightly. That to have it is to be baptized. In truth, and the truth is, he wants to be chosen by a woman who cannot be fooled, to be seen by eyes that recognize spirit over surface. But how do you confess this to a woman who already reads you like scripture? You don't. You let your actions say it. You stay, you show up, you do the work, because the spiritually awakened. Woman is not waiting, she is not lonely. She is not yours to possess. She is an initiation. And the man who dares to step into that fire either emerges transformed or turns to Ashdod. So when he says, "You're different," it's not a line, it's awe. When he goes quiet around you, it's not disinterest, it's reverence and a scramble to find the part of him that feels worthy of your gaze. There's one more thing he'll never say, but it pulses beneath every word, every stare. Every stumble. I hope you don't give up on me. I hope you hold your standard and still hold the door open. I hope you challenge me and still believe I can rise. I hope you see that behind my armor is a boy who just wanted to be enough. And you, awakened woman, you do see it. But the question is, will you wait for him to see it too? Asterisk, he wants to be held, but not in body, in soul. He yearns for something he does not yet have the words for, to be fully seen, utterly known, and yet untouched by judgment. When a man encounters a spiritually awakened woman, he doesn't just meet a person, he confronts a mirror, not the kind that flatters or distorts, but one that reflects the raw truth of who he is beneath every layer of performance, ego, and expectation. She carries with her the weightless power of presence. Not neediness, not seduction, just unwavering awareness. And it stirs in him 7 longings he has buried, sometimes so deeply that even he forgets they exist. The first desire is to lose control, not in chaos, but in surrender. To relinquish the armor he wears every day to seem competent, composed, and certain. With her, he secretly wishes for a space where he doesn't have to lead, fix, or prove. Because in her energy, leadership is not dominance, but direction of the soul. And so he watches her sometimes from a distance, and his heart aches for the liberation she radiates. She walks in her truth, and it both terrifies and entices him. Deep inside, he wants to lay down his sword and be guided, but this is a truth he may never say out loud. The second desire is to be forgiven for his wounds, not just the wounds he carries, but the ones he has caused. Most men have been told that accountability is punishment, that shame is the only price of mistake. But the spiritually awakened woman does not shame, she witnesses. She doesn't condone his darkness, but she invites him to meet it with honesty. And in her silence, in her refusal to react, he senses the possibility of redemption. A redemption not earned through apology, but through transformation. What he cannot say to his mother, to his former lovers, to the version of himself he left behind, he wants to say to her, not through words, but through change. The third desire is to be challenged, not with criticism, but with clarity. A spiritually awakened woman doesn't flatter, she reflects. And in her gaze, he sees not what he is, but what he could be. It stings, it ignites, it humbles. For the first time, he is not praised for potential. He is questioned for the gaps between his talk and his truth. She doesn't ask for more, she expects it, without threat, without ultimatum. And this unspoken standard awakens a fire in him, not of rebellion, but of return. He begins to wonder, what would it be like to rise to meet her? The fourth desire is to be safe in his softness. In a world that rewards hardness emotionally, sexually, financially, he has forgotten that he once had a tender center. He hides his longing to weep, to tremble, to speak of dreams that make no money, but feed the soul. When she listens without interrupting, when she breathes through his pauses, when she doesn't flinch at his fear, a door creaks open. He wants to collapse into her lap like a child coming home from war, not to be coddled, but to remember who he was before the battle. The fifth desire is to possess her, not in body, but in mystery. And this is where his ego fights hardest, because a spiritually awakened woman cannot be owned. She dances between worlds, sensual and spiritual, earthy and cosmic. She is not defined by roles, lover, wife, muse. She is defined by presence. And this both seduces and enrages him. He wants to name her, to capture her, to understand her entirely. But each time he tries, she slips through his grasp. Not because she is elusive, but because she is free. And what he truly desires is not to own her mystery, but to be initiated into it. The sixth desire is to be chosen, not because he is needed, but because he is worthy. Spiritually awakened women do not cling. They do not fill voids with bodies. They walk away with grace when alignment breaks. And this terrifies the man who is raised to equate love with utility. He secretly longs to be picked, not for what he provides, but for who he is in his barest truth. To be loved not as a savior or a solution, but as a soul on his own path. Her ability to walk away makes her love more valuable. And though he may never say it, he aches to be chosen by a woman who doesn't need him. The seventh desire is to become not for her, but because of her. The spiritually awakened woman is not a destination. She is a catalyst. Her presence evokes evolution. Her silence stirs questions. Her absence creates space. And in the echo of her departure, many men begin the journey they postponed for lifetimes. He may resent her. He may blame her, but he will remember her. And in remembering, he will begin to remember himself. Not all men can hold her. Not all will try. But the ones who can or dare to must face their own shadows, sit with their shame, and rise into a new kind of masculinity. One not built on control, but on consciousness. Not on dominance, but on devotion. A love that doesn't consume, but consecrates. And she will not wait. She is the storm and the stillness, the temple, and the flame. She moves forward, not because she is done loving, but because her love is sacred. And sacred things do not stay where they are not revered. The man who can meet her there in his full becoming will not own her. He will honor her. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses. There is a turning point in every man's inner world when the fire of ego begins to flicker, not because it has been extinguished, but because it is finally met by something it cannot burn away: presence. A spiritually awakened woman does not try to fix or flatter a man's broken edges. She simply sees them, and in doing so, she unsettles him in the most holy way. This is where the fifth secret desire hides, not in dominance, not in control, but in the unspoken wish to be seen in totality without being devoured or shamed. Many men live decades without ever feeling this kind of gaze, the one that sees past ambition, confidence, cleverness, and into the bones of who they really are. And though it terrifies him, it also calls him home. There's a deep desire in the masculine to finally meet a woman who cannot be manipulated, seduced by performance, or impressed by power. He longs to stand before someone who doesn't care how much he earns, how fast he climbs, or how well he plays the game of life, but who is instead attuned to the soul underneath all the armor. But here's the spiritual riddle: to be seen like that, he must let himself be naked, not physically, but emotionally, psychically, energetically. And that is something he's been trained his whole life to avoid. The world rewards masks, not vulnerability. So when a spiritually awakened woman meets a man who is still living through ego, there's a silent battle. She sees him, he senses it. And rather than open, he might withdraw, mock her depth, or try to control the narrative, because if he can't own her attention, he can't own his own truth either. This secret desire to be undone in the presence of a feminine energy that doesn't wound is often hidden behind dismissiveness, avoidance, or arrogance. But make no mistake, the yearning is there. He wants to find the place where he no longer has to pretend. But he needs to believe it's safe. And more importantly, he needs to believe he's worthy. That's the journey most men never complete. They chase women who reflect their surface, not their soul, because soul recognition demands more than charm. It requires rebirth. At the core of this dynamic is surrender. Not the romanticized kind, but the ancient kind, the one warriors feared and mystics craved. True surrender is not giving up, it's letting go of the version of yourself you've built to survive. And when a man begins to desire this surrender, he often projects it outward. He obsesses over a woman, dreams of her, even avoids her. Because deep down he knows she's the one who could help him unbuild the cage he's called manhood. This is the paradox he lives in. He desires her spiritual depth, her unapologetic softness, her intuitive clarity. But he also fears that same energy because it threatens every version of masculinity he's been taught to honor. And so, the dance begins. He pushes, then pulls. He hides, then hints. He might call her too much or too intense, not realizing it's not her intensity that's too much, hits his unreadiness to meet her at that level. The fifth secret desire, then, is the wish to finally be enough without proving. It surrounds spiritually awakened women. Men crave peace, not performance. They want their silence accepted, their wounds acknowledged without pity, their ambitions questioned with love. But for many, the fear of not being man enough in the presence of such power keeps them stuck in shallow roles. They'd rather be desired than dismantled. But the truth is, every man wants to be dismantled by the right woman. And this dismantling doesn't come from criticism or demand. It happens in the sacred quiet of spiritual chemistry. She looks at him and says nothing, and yet everything unravels. He remembers who he was before the world told him who to be. He craves that, but he may never admit it. Because to admit that is to walk the path of the soul. And most men, until life breaks them open, would rather risk losing the awakened woman than losing their illusion of control. Still, even if they walk away, they carry her with them. Her presence lingers. Not because of her body, but because of her energy. She becomes a mirror they can't unsee. And one day, perhaps years later, he will remember her, not for what she said or did, but for what she revealed. That he was always enough. That the war inside him was never his to fight alone. And so we reach the quiet. Necessary and not of longing, but of awakening. The woman who stands before him now is not the woman who once waited for him to catch up. She is not the echo in his mind anymore. She is the force that lives in his shadow, shaping the silence he fears, embodying the mystery he cannot name. The spiritually awakened woman does not end love with rage or bitterness. She ends it by evolving beyond the need to be desired by someone who could not meet her at her depth. She no longer performs softness to be chosen. She no longer dims her fire so he feels warm. She walks in truth, even if it burns. Because in her world, authenticity is more sacred than attachment, and peace is more valuable than presence. She has stopped waiting for someone to validate the vastness of her soul. Stopped hoping that he would meet her where her spirit lives in vulnerability, in accountability, in emotional depth, and the man he may never admit it, but she became his most profound mirror. He doesn't miss her body. He misses who he almost became with her. That ache in his chest, it's not for her laughter or the touch of her hand. It's for the version of himself that only she ever believed he could be. And that grief is eternal, for she left, with his potential still pulsing in her memory. He cannot stop replaying the way she chose peace over passion, truth over tolerance, self-worth over sacrifice. In his dreams, she still turns to him, eyes ancient with wisdom and a calm that cannot be bought. But in his waking life, she is gone. And now, in the corridors of his emotional solitude, he finally understands. She was not asking for too much. She was asking for presence, for truth, for a love not born of hunger, but of wholeness. To love a spiritually awakened woman is to meet her beyond ego, beyond mask. It is to surrender to emotional transparency, to show your wounds not as weakness, but as your sacred doorway. But most men aren't ready for that kind of unveiling. They are terrified of being seen, not just admired. They crave love that heals, but run from the mirrors that reveal their fractures. And she holds that mirror like a priestess, knowing it will either transform or terrify. So she leaves, not in anger, but in reverence for herself. And this departure is what binds her to his psyche. He becomes obsessed, not with her, but with the void her absence carved. Because her love was not addictive, it was corrective. It didn't manipulate or beg or plead. It revealed. And when she walked away, she didn't just take her body. She took the illusion with her. She took the excuses, the delays, the lies he told himself, and left only the truth, that real love requires readiness. And she was ready. He was not. But that's no longer her burden to carry. For in her world now, there are no half-truths, no diluted emotions, no love that hides behind a closed heart. She doesn't settle for the promise of becoming. She demands presence. And if that is too much for someone, then they are not her path, they are her lesson. So hear this clearly. The woman who let go was not weak. She was the storm that learned to walk in silence, the flame that refused to burn herself to keep him warm, the truth he could not hold, and what haunts him most. She didn't leave to punish him. She left to honor herself. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.